Hi, and welcome to Ivy English. I'm Karen.
And I'm Chris Gorski.
Today is May 13th, and we're on page 34 in your magazines, and today we have 2 short news stories for you.
That's right. When I see these little news articles we have, I always try to remind myself, use that news reporter voice.
Let's hear it.
We'll try it a little later.
How about just reading the title with your news
Okay,
voice?
we'll try that. EU approves full Schengen membership for Bulgaria and Romania.
I love that deep voice. I love deep male voices, actually. Okay, that is our title of our first article. EU approves full Schengen membership for Bulgaria and Romania. The European Union, EU, has officially welcomed Bulgaria and Romania as full members of its Schengen area. While restrictions on air and sea travel had been lifted earlier, land border controls were held up due to an objection from Austria over concerns about illegal migration.
The Schengen area, the largest zone of free movement in the world, now consists of 25 of the 27 EU member states. More than 425 million EU citizens, as well as those living in or visiting the area, can travel and work without facing excessive regulations at border checkpoints. However, tensions over security and migration occasionally cause friction between member states. For example, Germany temporarily brought back border controls last year to combat illegal migration.
There's a lot of information in this piece. It's short, but there's a lot in it, and it's worth working through so that you can kind of understand an important international political situation. So when the EU took down those border controls, as an American, and we've always been conscious of the issue with illegal migration from Mexico, Central and South America, I thought, how are you going to manage it? How can you trust the process?
I agree, and we grew up close to the Canadian border, which is a friendly nation. However, I'm sure you've gone to Canada.
I have.
And you know that the Canadian and U.S. border is still very secure, and they take a long time checking your documents. It's not an automatic, oh, you're from the United States, come on in, or even you're a U.S. citizen returning to the U.S., come on home. They will stop you, they will check you, they will hold you up. To think that you can just simply cross over into another nation without much effort, I agree, sounds very surprising from our perspective.
So now you can guess how long ago it was that I last entered Canada. They kind of shoot us through, but actually not completely because I was traveling with a Taiwanese friend. And because of this Taiwanese friend, they kind of were stricter.
I used to be a tour guide, and I would drive our tour bus into Canada. And I often had to inform other Americans before we drove into Canada. They might not necessarily be from the region, and so they're unfamiliar with crossing into another nation, especially Canada. And I often would take time on the drive to the border to remind everybody that this is a very serious deal. Do not lie. Do not joke. Americans love to joke about guns. That is something you should never joke about.
Never do at the border.
Don't joke about drugs.
Nope.
This is something I had to take time every single trip into Canada. And I agree, in a funny way, thinking, oh, yeah, we're from relatively the same area. Come on in. Seems very surprising.
Yeah, that's right. But especially now, there are so many other problems that we have to worry about, like you mentioned, guns and drugs and things. And keep up with the news. There have been some developments with the U.S. border with Mexico in that area. So let's go to our article. Our title again is EU approves full Schengen membership for Bulgaria and Romania.
Why don't we define what the Schengen membership is?
I was just going to get that. So when you see this kind of a headline or a title, you may shy away from it thinking, Bulgaria, where's that? I don't care about Bulgaria. And Romania, I don't know much about Romania either. So the first thing is deal with the easier ones first. So just look up Bulgaria and Romania on a map or just go to Wikipedia and find out something about them. That's the first thing. Once that's out of the way, make sure you know that the EU is the European Union. Then what is left is Schengen. And that is unfamiliar to many, many people. We don't know how to say it usually. I know how to say it because I checked online. Also, I know from German. Just use the German pronunciation. They speak a dialect of German in the country where that particular village is found. So Schengen is a village in Luxembourg. So in Luxembourg, they speak a dialect of German. It's somewhat different from German, but I can understand most of it if I listen to the news. So why did they pick this particular village? It's because an agreement was signed there in 1985.
That's right. And so this was later expanded into a larger area in 1995. And some areas were included, but not others. And so originally the Schengen area was Belgium, France, Germany, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands, which are all relatively close. Over time, this was expanded. However, some countries were not included, including Bulgaria and Romania. If you are curious where those are, imagine where Greece is. Look north, and it's right about there. That's where we're talking about.
It's a good description if you know where Greece is.
If you don't know where Greece is, look at Africa and look north.
Go look at a map. Looking at a map. And what you should do is I teach my students this as a study method. One study method is just to stare at something, especially if it's a map. Stare at it for maybe 20 minutes and kind of move around, find out what is next to what is not connected to what. Just stare at a map for 20 minutes. That's usually how I drive. If I have to drive to an unfamiliar place, I've given up on GPS. I stare at the map for 20 minutes, I take notes, and I get there.
That's interestingly one way that I learned geography as a kid.
There you go.
As a kid, I loved geography and studying maps. And one thing I would do is just look at them and say, this is next to this is north of this. And that relative position helped make geography very easy for me.
Okay, I am like you on that point. I've always liked geography. I played Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego?
Such a good game.
I knew all the capitals, and everybody was looking at me. How do you know all those capitals? Well, I'm interested in it. That's right. And also, how many African countries can you name, I wonder? I'm not asking Chris, I'm asking our listeners. So Chris probably is pretty good at this. I think I could name all of them. I maybe won't think of a couple of them just on the spot, but I can probably name all the African countries, and that's how I learned them.
Very interesting. There are fun games you could play online if you're interested in this.
That's
right. And I'm sure you could also do it with the Schengen membership area as well.
That's right. Okay, so Schengen is a village in Luxembourg. It's part of Benelux, which is which three countries?
Great question.
Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg.
And what's it called?
Benelux.
Benelux. I have never heard this term before.
I guess it hasn't been in the news recently, but that's how I learned it. So Benelux, that's three countries. And this is the smallest of them, and it gets kind of ignored. One thing about Luxembourg is most people there know 4 languages.
Just its
4
proximity
languages.
To everything else, right?
Yeah, and it's also a place where people do a lot of banking. So do some research into Luxembourg. It's very small, but it's very interesting. All right, so the European Union has approved full Schengen membership for 2 new countries, namely Bulgaria and Romania. So now I think we're okay with the title. Let's go to the first sentence of the first paragraph. The European Union, EU, has officially welcomed Bulgaria and Romania as full members of its Schengen area. We've taken care of that. We've already explained that. Let's move on. While restrictions on air and sea travel had been lifted earlier, land border controls were held up due to an objection from Austria over concerns about illegal migration. Now, if you have been following the news at all in Europe, that is a problem all over Europe now, and a lot of countries now are really trying to figure out a solution or some way to deal with it. I follow the news from France especially closely. They have a huge political divide, something like in the U.S., maybe not quite as bad, but pretty bad. And one of the core issues is migration. They have so many migrants, and a lot of people do not like it.
So air and sea travel just means by airplane or by boat. Those are easier to control because there are only so many places that you can enter, an airport or a harbor. However, land border controls are much more difficult to police or to cover because this includes roads. You can hide in cars. You can look for roads where police are currently not stationed. If you are going into certain areas, you don't need to go by car or road at all. You can literally run through the forest or cross a river. And now you're in a new nation. Land border controls are much more difficult to police, and Bulgaria and Romania apparently had a much more difficult issue. So other nations said, we're not quite ready to let you in yet until you get your borders under control.
Yeah, and this especially applies to people from poorer countries of Africa because they will illegally, hire somebody to take them over by boat. They drop them off on the coast, and then they start walking or hitching rides or whatever. So it's going to be a problem. So that's why it has been an issue in the past. I don't know if it's fixed now, but at least they put it through. Okay, let's move on to the second paragraph.
The Schengen area, the largest zone of free movement in the world, now consists of 25 of the 27 EU member states.
Which begs the question, which two are not included?
Well, I know for a fact Ireland isn't included.
Right.
Because Ireland said we want more control over our borders. However, Ireland, interestingly, has an open movement border with the rest of the United Kingdom. So
it's kind of hard to enforce.
It's difficult to enforce because of their proximity, but they also have a large water border.
Right.
So Ireland is an interesting case because of its location. And then the other one
is Cyprus.
Cyprus. Okay, sure.
And that is partly due, I think, to the Turkish-Greek situation. Yeah. The island is divided between two different ethnic groups.
And now we have Bulgaria, Romania, which I told you were located north of Greece, and now we have Cyprus. All this kind of fits together as a puzzle, doesn't it?
I guess so. Okay, so those are the two member states that are not members of the Schengen area.
More than 425 million EU citizens, as well as those living in or visiting the area, can travel and work without facing excessive regulations at border checkpoints.
And this sounds like a really great thing for a lot of people who want to go to a different country to work. And one example I can think of is lots of Poles went to England to work.
That's true. I recall being of Polish ancestry, a lot of the older Polish immigrants that I knew from my old community brought this up. And I often actually heard many of the British people say very nice things about the Polish people, but the Polish people in my former community were still very upset about this.
Because they were leaving Poland?
They were just old, grumpy Polish people mad about that they had to be the migrants rather than people migrating to their country for work.
Oh, it's
they
a matter
took it
of
as
face.
a little bit of a face issue. That's exactly right.
But the thing is, to be frank, they are white. They are European. Going to England, I guess most of them did okay with the language. The British were actually pretty okay with the Poles taking over a lot of jobs that Brits did not want to do.
I heard nothing but positive things all around. It was the American Polish migrants that were the most upset about this.
Okay, next sentence.
Our next sentence. However, tensions over security and migration occasionally cause friction between member states.
It's often. It's not just occasionally. It's a key issue.
For example, Germany temporarily brought back border controls last year to combat illegal migration.
And I can fully understand that because I was very surprised when Germany opened their doors to Syrians who had to flee Syria. They now have lots and lots of migrants, and not all Germans are happy about it. And having migrants already there means more are going to be coming in to join them. Okay, so I think this was a very informative article. But I bet you probably need more information, so go online and do a search. We're going to move on to our second article entitled Coffee Prices at a Record High Due to Supply Shortages.
So a shortage is a noun that means we don't have enough. From a personal perspective, I can tell you that this is absolutely true. My dear colleague and I, Shay, split our coffee in our office, and we would buy several containers from Costco. And for a long time, it was around 300 NT for a large bucket. I can't quite recall how much, maybe a few kilos. Very cheap. And now it is currently well over 500 NT and climbing. Now, this still per cup works out to be very cheap for us, but it is long ways away from $300 for a few kilos of pre-ground coffee.
But these are first world problems. Yeah. There are some serious reasons why this has happened.
Right.
So let's find out about them. Coffee prices have reached new highs after nearly half a century due to poor weather in Brazil and Vietnam. The last time such prices were recorded was in 1977 when snow destroyed coffee plantations in Brazil. Responsible for nearly half of the world's Arabica bean supply, Brazil experienced its worst drought in 70 years during August and September last year, followed by heavy rains in October. Vietnam, which accounts for about 40% of global Robusta bean production, also faced droughts and heavy rainfall last year.
Farmers will benefit from the new price of $3.35 US dollars per pound for Arabica, but traders will suffer as they face higher costs. Major coffee roasters like Nestle have already started raising their prices, prompting consumers to seek more affordable options.
And we're all just worried about our Morning Joe.
Yeah, I suppose so. I am definitely a coffee addict nowadays. Being on vacation, as we currently are, it's not actually May, I don't have my normal amount of coffee, and I can tell you I've been a little hazy. So I've had to step up my coffee production at home, which my wife says, you really drink a lot of coffee, which was a deep, deep secret of mine until just recently.
Well, you thought it was a secret.
Well, she knows now.
Okay, and I said Morning Joe. Joe is spelled J-O-E with a small or lowercase j. It just means your morning coffee. And there are probably some TV shows and podcasts called Morning Joe.
That's right. Java, your cup of Joe. Give me a cuppa. There are many ways to say get your coffee in the morning.
That's right. Okay, our title again, coffee prices at a record high due to supply shortages. It should be pretty straightforward and clear. Our first sentence, coffee prices have reached new highs after nearly half a century due to poor weather in Brazil and Vietnam. They could have said after nearly 50 years, but when they say half a century, it sounds, oh man, that's been so long.
Yeah, sometimes it is framed slightly different, just to give it a little bit more emphasis. I agree. I actually recall when I had 5 years teaching experience, fretting on my own resume, thinking, do I say 5 years teaching experience or half a decade? Which sounded longer. Yeah.
I think half a decade sounds a little presumptuous.
Doesn't it?
Yeah.
I went with 5 years.
That's better. I think it's definitely better. Don't try to show off. People see through it immediately. Everybody.
Well, when you have just 5 years of teaching experience,
You're doing
you
what
need to
you
stretch
can.
that resume all you can.
Yeah, but people will see through it. Okay, so after around 50 years, coffee prices have never been quite as high as they have become recently. And it also gives us the reason that in two key coffee-producing nations, Brazil and Vietnam, they have had some very bad weather for coffee growing.
So we have used due to twice today. So in our first paragraph, we have land border controls were held up due to an objection. Don't forget, we could also say thanks to and because of. Whenever I come across these with my students, I always make them say all three so that it becomes automatic. And what I found is that whenever I see due to, I automatically say thanks to because of.
You will notice that both Chris and I do not say due to. We both say due to. And when I tell my students this, they are often absolutely shocked. They've never heard it or they've never noticed it. With the d, t, n, l sounds plus u, in American English, we often omit the y sound. We don't say student, we usually say student. And we don't usually say due, we say do. Okay? We don't always say new, we often say new. Newspaper instead of newspaper, and so forth. On to the next sentence. The last time such prices were recorded was in 1977 when snow destroyed coffee plantations in Brazil. And that's kind of shocking to read because I think of Brazil as a very hot tropical country. And snow, they probably were not ready for that.
I agree, and I wonder if these 1977 prices were adjusted for inflation, because I imagine the 500 NT that I pay for coffee today, if this were in $1977, if it were 1977 and I were paying 500 NT for coffee, that would really seem extremely high. So I imagine this is adjusted for inflation using today's dollars rather than $1977.
They usually do that. Responsible for nearly half of the world's Arabica bean supply, Brazil experienced its worst drought in 70 years during August and September last year, followed by heavy rains in October. So in English, we say, when it rains, it pours. So you can have a long period when you have no rain at all, but once it starts raining, it pours, and that's what happened in Brazil.
So Arabica beans are the most popular coffee beans in the world. These are about 60 to 70% of production globally. And why are they so popular? Well, one reason is that they have a smoother taste than the world's second most popular bean, Robusta, which we'll see very shortly here. Arabica beans have about 1.1% caffeine, and Robusta actually has a lot more caffeine.
Oh.
And that gives it the smoother taste. This smaller amount of caffeine gives it a smoother taste. I was thinking about the coffee that I have in my office, and I don't actually know if it's Arabica or Robusta. All I know is that it gets the job done.
Makes me think that if you have problems sleeping, maybe you should go with Arabica.
I suppose so, but we stop drinking coffee around 6 o'clock because we work in the evenings. So, it's just the point is it gets you ready for the day.
Okay. Vietnam, which accounts for about 40% of global Robusta bean production, also faced droughts and heavy rainfall last year. So Chris has just told you something about Robusta. If you really need kind of a slap in the face when you wake up in the morning, maybe you'll go with Robusta.
That's right. Robusta is a little more acidic. It is a little more bitter, but it has double the caffeine at 2.2%. And this can make it that little bit bitter, so maybe you need a little bit more water or a little bit cream if you prefer it that way. I actually thought Robusta was one of those marketing names that you hear about new varieties of fruits or chilies, and they give it these ridiculous names. It turns out Robusta was first discovered in Ethiopia in 1897.
That's interesting.
There we go.
Okay,
let's go to our next paragraph. Farmers will benefit from the new price of $3.35 US dollars per pound for Arabica, but traders will suffer as they face higher costs.
So at least the farmers will get some benefit from the higher prices, but with the traders who are the middlemen, they are going to be charging more and people are going to complain.
So that's about 110 NT for half a kilogram of coffee. Major coffee roasters like Nestle have already started raising their prices, prompting consumers to seek more affordable options.
Now, that's kind of scary. You're not going to drink my coffee, then the whole market is going to be in crisis, possibly.
Oh, it's Nestle. Who cares?
If you want some background on that, do a little Google search on Nestle.
Yeah, I've tried very hard to remove Nestle from my life. It is very tricky, but it can be done.
Yeah, and if you want to kind of help with what to look for, look up water, bottled water. Start with that. You can try baby food or baby formula, things like that.
That's right. Nestle baby food, Nestle water, controversy, and you'll go down a very, very deep rabbit hole. Yes. So just in case you were wondering, coffee was first discovered in Ethiopia. It was a bunch of farmers that apparently, the story goes, noticed their goats were really, really excited after chomping down on some plants in the 9th century. And so the local people said, well, let me try these too. And they would eat them. And then eventually someone had the great idea to turn it into a drink. And there we go. That's the history of coffee.
And now a huge portion of mankind is addicted.
Thank you very much to those farmers.
That's it for today. Tune in next time. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.